Hello and welcome to another episode of Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail, and as always, today I'm joined by...
Brendan Rorison, and we're back discussing, well, Adam, there are many different names for what we're going to discuss today. It's a very strange series that has quite a history across every region, but for some people it might be penny racers, for others it might be gadget racers, for some people it might be road trip adventure in some cases, but more appropriately I suppose it's kind of generally accepted to be the Choro Q series, and this is one we've been trying to discuss for a while, isn't it? But the issue is that there are just so many games in this series, and where do you even start?
Yeah, this is a series that since I've known you, you've been speaking, I don't know, highly of, but I feel like you brought it up. You've brought it up a lot over the years. Maybe not a lot, but every like 10 episodes or so, it shows up. And a little bit of a history note here. If you didn't know, Brendan and I met on GT Planet reviewing a Micro Machines game together, so like co-reviewing it. So I feel like Choro Q must have come up in the Micro Machines conversation like 3 or 4 years ago. Was it 5 years ago? I think it was like 5 years ago. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Where's the time go, man?
Exactly, mate. But yeah, it's interesting because even through the Micro Machines chat at the time, I remember you were saying obviously like those kind of top-down, kind of small toy-based racers were not really something you were that interested in, but it's interesting because like penny racers, I suppose, or gadget racers or whatever, falls into that type of category of toy car racing, but it's more on a kind of grander scale, so the similarities are there, but at the same time I can see why this would have never kind of clocked on your radar, I suppose.
Yeah, the beauty of Choro Q and all its various names is that this is a typical, chase cam 3D perspective racer, which is, always something that I'm looking for. The top-down stuff I struggle with. And I was initially really excited to try these games because I think it was a Christmas episode where we were really getting into it, and we decided that we needed to do an episode on Choro Q. You were talking about the whole like attempt to try and make this like grand CarPG experience out of a game that's ostensibly about like, a toy line. And
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really cool. Unfortunately, I played a couple of these games here and there, and I just could not bring myself to stick with the experience long enough to like get sunk into it. But in terms of the ambition, that is very, very cool, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of things to talk about that are more humorous because wow, does the story mode at times get really, really weird. You keep retweeting every couple of weeks. I feel like I keep seeing the screen cap of the president from one of the games, and yeah, that's a whole Choro Q mood, as it turns out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in total there's like 29 games as stands in this series, and the way that they've tried to kind of create the game, each time they always change things up. So like you're saying, obviously there's like the story heavy ones in there. There's a very odd army themed one as well, that was actually branded in Europe not under any of the Gadget Racers, Penny Racers, Road Trip branding, which I didn't know was actually a Choro Q game until we started kind of looking into the games for this episode. And then of course you have the more kind of standard racing game type ones like on the GBA and such, and it's not really a surprise, I suppose, that maybe it didn't grab you that much, Adam, because the one thing about these games I would say as a whole is that the actual experience of driving and racing in them in the early hours is pretty bad. The game takes this idea of upgrading cars to a level that's almost parody in terms of the way the cars feel and drive. At first, to me, have always been very clunky and stuff across all the titles that I've played. And it isn't until you get those kind of late game parts and such that the actual handling engine shows what it has to offer. So I mean, if the kind of general vibe of the game is already off to a bad start in terms of maybe trying to grab you from that perspective, I imagine the actual driving experience for the ones you did play perhaps wasn't to the standard that you would find enjoyable. Is that what the kind of main blocker was for you?
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, these all seem like very budget titles to me, which is fine. You know, I've liked some of those games over the years, but there just wasn't anything that hooked me. Now I went for more, and I didn't play a lot of these either, but I was more interested in how the series started. Whereas I feel like the games that you bring up are more the ones that came later and really tried to flesh out that world. So that might have something to do with it too. We can just give like a background as to how like the number of games are in this series. I'll walk through because I'm on the Wikipedia page, which to be fair is actually pretty extensive in terms of the list of games. It lists all of them and goes to a decent length to explain where they came out because unsurprisingly, most of these did not hit the West. Only a very maybe like a third of them hit the West, and even less hit North America, from what I understand, which is another reason why I probably didn't get to play these games back in the day. But anyway, so there was a 1984 MSX game developed by Taito called Choro Q. We will not be talking about that one because it's an MSX game. But the series really got its start in '96 with the first Choro Q, which was called Penny Racers in Europe. Now, Penny Racers is, as I understand it, the Western/European name for the Choro Q toy line. And
yes,
because we haven't really explained this, Choro Q is basically like, it's like chibi, Mattel Matchbox cars or something like that. So it's a general idea. But yeah, so it was Choro Q in Japan, Penny Racers in Europe, and this one I do not think came out in the US. So straight away, I don't think we got any Choro Q games in North America until like 3 years later with the N64 version. So that's not off to a great start.
Yep.
And the first, what is it? Choro Q 1, 2, and 3, all developed by Tamsoft. Tamsoft, you may know as the developer gave us Ballerina Toshinden, a terrible game that everyone played at the PlayStation 1's launch because it was a fighting game that was graphically pretty good for the time and also had a lot of large-breasted women. And that's really all you need to succeed as a fighting game in the mid-90s, unfortunately. But so you have those. Choro Q Jet and Choro Q Marine, which are these like sort of offshoots. And with Choro Q Marine, which I didn't really look into these, but that one's on the PlayStation. That one was developed by Barnhouse Effect, which would go on to make most of these games. Because the thing is, while Takara Tomy, the toy/media empire that is Takara Tomy, along the lines of, I guess, a Bandai Namco now, they published all the games, but many of them were developed by different companies, so you end up with six or seven developers, I feel like, have contributed to a series at varying points of time, which I would imagine makes all the games feel a little bit different from one another. So once you get out of the PlayStation days, there was the N64 one, as I said, was the first one that we got. That was Choro Q64, and Penny Racers, and then to speed things up, there was a Saturn game. There were a couple of handheld games. The N64 one got a sequel. Then you get to the PlayStation 2 days where they came out with Choro Q HG, which stands for high grade, as a Wikipedia article thankfully tells us. And that one was made by Barnhouse Effect. And the whole PS2 GameCube generation is, I think, what most people think of when they think
and
of
that's
Choro
where
Q.
I got involved as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
so Choro Q HG is where I actually kind of pick up the series. Somebody I knew had the GBA one, which means I had played that already, but in terms of where I actually get involved in the series, it really begins with HG, so you're correct there, Adam.
Yeah. In North America, the first HG. So this was Penny Racers again in Europe, and what makes this really annoying is that I would imagine makes it annoying is that like there's been like 3 or 4 games just called Penny Racers in Europe, all referring to different generations and different iterations of the series. In North America, they called it Gadget Racers, which, as far as I can tell, is not anything. That's not a toy brand. I don't know what that is. They just thought it would be, I guess, more appealing to North American players. But for whatever reason, you had Choro Q HG2. Now there was a Game Boy Advance version in there as well, but HG2, which came out like a year or two later, that one they just decided to hell with the Penny Racers thing. We're gonna call it Road Trip, and then Road Trip Adventure in Europe. So I feel like they were really trying to throw every single thing at the wall to try and get Western audiences to pay attention to the series, and it never really worked. But they never stopped making those games and selling them here. Like, they tried so many times. It's almost, because like a couple episodes ago we did Runabout, and it was weird how there were a couple Runabout games that we didn't get, but for the most part we got all of them. And the studios involved, Climax, they just kept trying. They were never like, this isn't working, we're just gonna give it up. Like, they just kept trying to see if something stuck, and it never did. But God bless them. Because of that, we got weird-ass Evangelion racing games. And Choro Q isn't even that far off the mark, to be honest.
Yeah, it gets even more complicated as well, because obviously when Road Trip is introduced, like you're saying, there's no precedent for why they would go down that route. But the games that follow a similar kind of strange scenario, and I'd kind of talked about the army one at the start of the episode, and that's what follows next through Shin Combat Choro Q, which is the Japanese name. But in Europe and North America, that was simply called Seek and Destroy. And if you look at the cover art for this game,
oh my god,
there is literally nothing whatsoever that ties into the whole Choro Q shit. So it gets even more complicated. At least Road Trip kind of looks like a Choro Q game to a certain extent. But if you read the plot synopsis for this game and look at the cover, it is fucking hilarious how this is part of the Choro Q lineage, because it's so far off what we've had from this point. And I'll be honest, I seen this game on shop shelves and I never touched it because it looked like a shitty army game. Like, I wouldn't have known any capacity that this was a Choro Q game. And as we often do when we do these episodes, I'm going to post a screenshot from the plot synopsis for this game, because there's like murder mentioned in there, there's death, there's fucking like proper army terms and stuff. I have no idea what this game is. I wish I had played it now though.
I don't think you have ever seen a game marketed in the Western region where the tone of the cover art and the marketing is more off the mark from how they planned it in Japan than with this game. Because going from Shin Combat Choro Q, which you look at the cover and it's in that classic Choro Q style, and then Seek and Destroy, which literally looks like army propaganda from like for the fucking US military. It's incredible. And the thing is, like, Shin Combat Choro Q, like, I'm looking at the gameplay of like Seek and Destroy, and it's one of those things where it's like they could pass it off as like kind of a toy appearance, but really it's just because that generation everything was kind of dull and sort of looked like it could be made out of plastic. So it was actually a fairly, I mean, if they were going to make any Choro Q be like this super aggro hardcore thing, then I guess they picked a good one, because it's a game that involves tanks, but maybe unless you were really paying attention, you wouldn't know that was supposed to be about like toys.
Yeah, exactly. And Oh man, look, at least in the US, it apparently had Takara's name on the front cover, but we had the fucking terrible plate branding, like one of those budget ones that published a lot of these games. So like there was no Takara branding at all. We had the same cover with the US flag and everything, the tanks. I literally just found out this was in the Choro Q lineage when we were doing research for this episode. I've seen this game many times throughout the years and never once clocked that it could be related to Choro Q. But once again, this just sums up the fucking madness of this series, and I think it's Choro Q HG4 that is simply called Choro Q in the US and Europe as well. So
Yeah, so it took them until very, very late to finally decide, to hell with it, we're gonna call this the same thing everywhere. It took them until 2003 in Japan, 2004 in North America, and 2005 in Europe. So there you go. And I think that one is generally considered the best, right? Although I do remember you speaking highly of Road Trip.
Yeah. Well, like it's funny. Like for me, my favorite game is just regular HG, and then I quite like Road Trip as well, just because it's a good laugh. But the reason that I really like HG, as I'm sure we'll go into later, is that I like the whole kind of RPG stuff, but I like the fact that regular HG was more like a kind of diet Gran Turismo, almost like Gran Turismo for boys, that like idea Kaz had at some point. For me, that kind of resonates more with that. But to be honest, HG4 is probably, objectively speaking, the most full-featured of the games. But yeah, what a strange lineage this series has. It's certainly something.
There was a DS game that was canceled, and then there was a Wii game which did come out and then was called Penny Racers Party Turbo Q Speedway. So they went back to Penny Racers at a certain point, which honestly, that seems like the inevitable thing to happen. You market a game for a decade as Penny Racers, and then you change the name to Choro Q. And even though it doesn't gain much steam as Penny Racers, like, that's what people know it as. So they kind of put themselves in this situation where it's like, you know, they have to go with this brand that they don't want to. And yeah, we haven't seen a console Penny Racers game since 2008. Or Choro Q, so I guess the series is effectively dead. There was apparently an Android game in Japan in 2012, but you know those barely count anyway. Ridge Racer had like 3 or 4 of those, and I can't remember the names of any of them, and they were all the same, so who cares? But yeah, that is the snapshot of the Choro Q franchise, and I don't even want to count how many games there are, but it's safe to say there are a lot, and Barnhouse Effect and Takara made a lot of them, made more than you would think.
Exactly, and I think this is why when people say that they like Penny Racers, or I played that when I was growing up, it's near impossible to actually distinguish which one it was unless they're absolutely aware of it. Like, for example, when I refer to Penny Racers, I'm talking about HG, the first HG, but obviously that could be the GBA game, it could be the Nintendo 64 game. There's just so much like confusion going on here, and that's why you could spend a whole episode just talking about all these differences and such, especially given that from a developer's point of view, I mean, thank goodness we've got this Wikipedia page, because like Takara just seemed to kind of take credit for all of the games in terms of like as if they're the developer. You don't actually see the developer names at all in the opening build-up for a lot of these games. It's usually just the publisher and Takara that appear, or in the case of the Wii version, it was Tomy at that point. But yeah, a very, very strange series with many, many different games, and all very similar games as well to a certain extent. It is one of these situations where if you don't like the general gameplay loop of these games, it's probably not worth playing the rest of them, and I think that's kind of where you found yourself, Adam, just based on what you were saying.
Yeah, I also want to throw in there, apparently some of them were published by your favorite publisher, Brendan, Midas Interactive. So yes, there you go.
Exactly. That's where a lot of my Midas interactions come from this series. But yeah, I think it was like Plate took it on from Road Trip think it was. So the regular Penny Racers games, or Choro Q HD ones, before they went the full CarPG route, was published by Midas, and then I think Play It took over. But it's very fucking complicated.
I've never heard. I mean, it's funny how you have these regional publishers. Like, there's some that we have in North America. Like, I don't know if you guys ever had Jester or Valcom, but I feel like what was published under Midas in Europe became Jester or Valcom when it came to the US. I don't know if they're the same company. I don't know if they're like, you know, another wing of Midas for just the US market. But all your like budget department store racing games from the PS2 era, like your Corvette Evolution GT or your DT Racer or your Suzuki TT Superbikes or that Alfa Romeo game, they were all I feel like they were like Midas in Europe, and then they came here and they're like Valcom or Jester. And anytime you saw those brands on a racing game, and it was usually a racing game that you wanted to play because, like, I don't know, like the Alfa Romeo one looked really cool on the cover, and so the Suzuki one. If you ever saw those logos, you needed to run, because chances are those games were also like $7 new, and you weren't really missing much. So yeah, there have been really good budget racers throughout history, but I don't know. I think Choro Q, what disappointed me about Choro Q, and I can kind of get into my experiences of playing a couple of these games now, is that if there's just something simple under the surface that works, that's usually all it takes for me to really get on board. And the closest thing I can compare it to is, like, I made a point to play Choro Q3, the PlayStation game. So we're not talking about the HG one. And this was Tamsoft's last game on the PlayStation for the Choro Q franchise. And you can actually, even though it didn't come out in the US, or in Europe, you can get an English fan translated patch for it. And in this game, it doesn't really have a story mode or anything like that, so it has minimal English anyway, but it throws in just enough to make it easy to understand. So I'm very thankful that exists. But I was thinking, like, okay, Choro Q3, this game came out in '98, so but at this point, it's kind of a little bit later. It's like midway through the PlayStation's life cycle, and these games probably look and play a little bit better now. And honestly, like, my sort of benchmark for like a budget PlayStation racer ever since I discovered it was Rally Day Africa and Rally Day Europe, because those games, when they came out in Japan, developed by Prism Arts, they were like budget racers. They were pretty simple, a handful of tracks, a handful of cars. There was no sort of crazy story mode. Very, very straightforward racing games, but they looked incredible and they played well enough, and they were just fun. And that's kind of what I was hoping from Choro Q, but I don't know. I think I just kind of have a dim view of everything Tamsoft did, because they just don't understand why they kept getting paid to make things back in the day. But excuse me. But yeah, Choro Q3, I wasn't really impressed. It starts out, and I feel like they change very little between the first three games, because they all kind of look the same. And it was just kind of one of those things where we tweak a few things, and then we throw it out there again as a budget title, and there's really no risk there involved, so why not do it? One of the cool things about Choro Q is that they go through a lot of different, like, classic Japanese sports cars and economy cars and stuff that maybe weren't as familiar to people in the West. So you have your, like, old school GTR Skyline, the KGC 10 or whatever. You have, like, an old Celica, but you also have, like, a Renault 5 Turbo. You have an NSX. You have I think there's, like, a BMW i7 in there. So the car lineup is quirky, and they all look very cute and, like, very on brand with, like, the way that the Choro Q vehicles look. But you go into the racing, and it's just not fun. The physics are, and maybe I'm missing the point just by, like, grading the physics of this game, but, like, it's one of those things where, like, something that they did a lot back in the 32-bit era, and something we talked about, I think, with was it MRC on the N64, but there are tons of games that kind of handled this way as well. I think about Manx CT Superbike on the Saturn, but it's that thing where like you turn and like if you're using the D-pad and if you hold your thumb to the left or right for too long, the car just starts skidding in a way where it's not savable, and in a way where you're not drifting. You are just going to pretty much like just skid off the road, complete understeer, but your car's kind of sideways and you're just going to like spear off in whatever direction you were facing when that happened. It's the same kind of thing. So like usually with games like that, what I try to do is like sort of like tap steer. Like I can never keep my thumb down for too long, so I'll just kind of like do left, 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 right, right, right. But then you don't really have enough grip to make the corner. So then I just ended up kind of like tapping the accelerator as well. So my car was doing this really jerky thing where it was like kind of losing it, but not. And I was hanging on the corner and it just wasn't fun. And then, it's not punishing at all to hit opponent cars in this game. But if you hit the wall, your race is over. And the AI is very fast. So in all of those ways, it just kind of feels like a more miserable Ridge Racer because you have this really, really punishing collision system and handling you can't quite master. And it just contributes to like this not enjoyable experience. It doesn't even look that good. Like I was thinking like, PlayStation, sort of the PS1 graphical aesthetic should work so well for Choro Q, and it really doesn't. It looks fine. The cars look good, but everything else is just pretty lifeless. And yeah, that was the first one I played, and that was that didn't really set a good taste in my mouth. And then most of them, like, I just kind of popped in, looked at YouTube videos because there are so many of these games, and
yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't really picking up on anything that changed. It's more like, and I think you kind of touched on this, while the gameplay experience stayed the same, what Barnhouse Effect, which would later go on to make these games and stuff, what they focused on more were all of the things around the racing, rather than the racing itself, which, is fair, I guess, for the kind of game that Choro Q is.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm just having a look at 3. I think it's funny you make the Ridge Racer comparison, because I think 3's the one that actually has a Ridge Racer track in there somewhere on the actual soundtrack. I need to confirm that. But
yeah,
I'm pretty sure there's like a small remix of a Ridge Racer tune in there. So it's funny you make that comparison.
So it is absolutely wild. But yeah, so I played 3, and first race you do, there's this like track that's an oval, and initially you like from the get-go there's this song with that famous like Ridge Racer chord progression of like do 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 do. I was like, all right, this is weird, especially being a PlayStation game, came out around the same time. I mean, a couple years after Ridge Racer in the arcades and stuff, obviously, but I'm like, okay, maybe there are a lot of songs through history. You think somebody ripped it off, and they didn't. So who knows? And then it gets to like the chorus part, and it is not exactly the same. There are some notes that are a little bit different, but the tempo is bang on with Ridge Racer. With the song Ridge Racer from the original game.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, there is no way that they weren't trying to rip this off in some fashion. Like this is too similar to just be a coincidence. I went on YouTube and I found the song, which was even hard enough because these Choro Q games aren't really well known by anyone, especially the ones that were just in Japan. And there were a couple comments where like, I would consider this more of a homage. Maybe they were just inspired, and I don't know. Maybe that's a favorable way of looking at it. Again, it kind of contributes to my belief that Tamsoft really didn't do anything notable or original during their time of relevancy. But I will say that song that like grossly rips off Ridge Racer is actually a pretty good song. It's like it's very similar, and at a certain point goes in like a little bit of a different direction.
Yeah, it's so funny when you hear it for the first time. Somebody put it in the Discord server, I'm sure, the first time.
That was me.
Oh, it was yourself, right?
It was me. Yeah, it
was me. So, it's just that part stood out to me. But having a look at Choro Q3, it's like, and this is why it's funny that I quite like some of these games, because it looks like the type of Choro Q game that I don't really like or want to play. Like, I like Road Trip Adventure, for example, because of how silly it is and stuff, but ironically, like, whenever they kind of add that stuff on top and it becomes overbearing, that's when I kind of become bored of the series, for the reason you're saying, where the driving isn't actually that great overall. The reason,
right.
just to go into my experience of the ones I played, I like the GBA one, because I quite like GBA era racers, so it's very straightforward, typical type of GBA racer, and it's good fun. But for me, like, the kind of pinnacle of the series in terms of my enjoyment came from Choro Q HG, the original, because they basically took that kind of concept of a Gran Turismo game and ported it into a kind of budget racer, but did so in a way that stripped out a lot of the stuff that I get bored of in these games. So I don't care about like the kind of side quest stuff or the fun, losing that term loosely, mini games. I just kind of like that idea of buying car bodies and like upgrading them and like making these kind of toy cars look ridiculous with like monster wheels and shit. And I feel as if the kind of loop was very efficient and concise in the regular HG, where there was grinding involved, but it was always just through races. Like, you didn't have to do anything peripheral to that. And I just
did
really
you have to run a script on your PC to do the same race over and over again?
Exactly. I remember the director of the game put out a statement saying that they want people to feel that they really own these toy cars and you have to earn them even without the use of microtransactions.
It reflects the real toy car market on eBay.
Exactly. Yeah. But like the loop in the regular HG is one of my favourites in this series, because I feel as if it's concise and to the point, and then even visually speaking, once again, maybe this is more of a kind of grown-up thing that I preferred it this way and then I'm biased in a way, but I quite like how they try to ape that kind of Simcade look as well to a certain degree in the regular HG, where it isn't this overly cartoony looking game, but it's these kind of toy cars in realistic-ish environments, colour palette wise and stuff, and a lot of people find it very boring looking HG, which is fair enough because it is a budget game, so it doesn't quite have that level of flair. Perhaps it needs to pull off that style. But this game for me was great because it was kind of what I think was missing in terms of like that type of Gran Turismo experience, where you can kind of downsize that experience and still have the main parts of it intact. And here, like, you have license tests that unlock certain races. The car body shop is a lot more fully featured than, say, the Q3 one that you were playing, Adam, and the parts shops, there's multiple parts shops and that sort of thing, which is pretty cool as well. There's endurance racing in there too with pit stops, which is good fun. And the different types of tyres and stuff you use impacts how kind of long you can go on certain stints before needing to pit, that sort of thing. There's just like that kind of level of depth that gives the racing that bit more excitement, and the loop of the game is so much more concise because it's done through menus. Hub worlds and stuff are fun, but for me growing up, this was always the kind of prime Choro Q experience, which is different to what a lot of people think, because they all love the more kind of dedicated RPG style of Road Trip. But when I look at like Q3, that is the type of game that I would have just ignored as a child growing up. But HG, or as it was known in Europe, just Penny Racers, it had enough of that Gran Turismo-ness about it that it really intrigued me. And then through replaying the games, this was the one that still took up the most of my time because it was just fun making certain builds of cars and stuff. The car list itself, in terms of the bodies that are here, are great because you've got like, the Stratos, you've got all the Japanese cars as well. You've got a lot of kind of Ferrari-like bodies and such. It's like, for me, this is the game that ticks the most boxes for what I look for in a racing game, but in a budget package as well. So it's not like it's not phenomenal looking, and the features aren't fully fledged. But I quite like the kind of small level of jank and what they were going for in this one. And for me, this is, whenever I'm talking about Choro Q, or Penny Racers, this is the experience I'm talking about. Which is funny because I know for the people who are massive fans of the series, this isn't the favourite, because apparently a lot of the charm is removed. But ironically, for me, I love that idea of taking a concept of a much larger game and trying to fit it into like a toy car based racer. And that's why, look, for me, HG is the king for that. I quite enjoy the gameplay loop. It's not too long as well, which is great. And then even on the handling front, compared to something like Road Trip, I felt as if right from the off the cars were at least a little bit fun to drive, whereas later in the series, or maybe even before this one too, when you don't have any modifications and stuff on the car, it can be a real struggle, especially the drifting part that you were talking about, Adam, is still intact in HG as well. So when your car starts drifting, it's just a frustrating experience rather than a fun one.
Yeah, I'm looking at gameplay of Gadget Racers, the US version of that game, and this being the PS2 one. And I feel like, I was probably more inclined to like the earlier, or as you say, the more streamlined. The games are more faithful to whatever you would say, the Choro Q brand is. But, this game really doesn't seem to... It it just like throws everything at you. It's like it's not afraid. It's not afraid to be weird. It's not afraid to be over the top. I mean, I just watched somebody modified what looked like a Ferrari 330 P4, but I'm sure wasn't licensed, with like the legs of the robot legs of like, I don't know, some kind of like robotic I don't know, tarantula or something like that. So it's a body of a car and then like, these legs, and then it like moves. The legs move as it drives, and it moves faster as they go along. Like, this is weird. Like, I see a Beetle with like rockets on the side of it. This person's got a RAV4. I think I just saw an XJR9. There's an XJR9 in this game. Yeah, it is a combination of every single thing that you wouldn't think belongs together in a racing game, and it happens to be under the guise and the theme of a toy car brand. It seems like there was really never a moment where they decided that they went too far. They just kept pushing all of the wackiest ideas. I'm now watching a 996 911 go around this oval circuit, and it just distinctly looks very like Driving Emotion Type S between the car and the track. So yeah, this is weird, but yeah, I feel like I might have enjoyed this one more. It even feels like the cars might be a little bit more manageable. Like they don't sort of understeer and lose control in like really weird ways, and the modifications, as you say, they let you do whatever you want. It takes it to a pretty absurd degree. I was really disappointed in Choro Q3 when, since modifying cars seems to have been like the hallmark of the series from the get-go. Yeah. And I did like the first 3 races, and I don't know what I have to do to unlock more parts, but I couldn't unlock more parts. So, like, to even buy. I had this money, but I couldn't spend it. And I was like, what am I supposed to... How am I supposed to make my car better? Because it's undrivable right now if there aren't other components for me to buy to improve it. And that's why I put the game down. So, yeah, this one looks a little bit better at that.
It's cool as well because the modifications and stuff to the cars For some tracks might be necessary. So, for example, there are underwater segments in some tracks, and then you need to fit a propeller so that you can actually go fast underneath, or an engine, that kind of speedboat engine type thing in the back of your car. And then for some tracks, you can fit wings onto your car too. So, like if you go up a ramp, the wings will deploy, and you can take a shorter route than just driving normally.
Wow.
And then if you're on desert tracks as well, if you've got monster truck wheels on, you will have higher speeds and that sort of thing. So there's like a good amount of variation there, and it's interesting because if you enter certain championships, you kind of have to go with a build that gives you the best chance of finishing in the most points, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have the right equipment to win every race. So it starts to get interesting from that point of view. There are tournaments that basically look at the weight of your car, and if you exceed a certain weight, then you can't enter. So you have to kind of manage. Oh well, I want to have this propeller, but then I'll have to get rid of the downforce, like kind of kit I've put on the car and that sort of thing. So there's like a good amount of races and stuff in here that make it a bit more varied, and that kind of ties back into the endurance type racing and stuff I was talking about earlier, where it feels like in this game they were more like, what is it about a regular racing game that people enjoy? How do we apply that in a kind of Choro Q type way? And you still get all that craziness and stuff, but I don't know, I just feel as if the kind of loop in this game is a lot more fun just because it is more inspired by the type of racing game when this came out that was really the highest in popularity thanks to GT. And the car list and stuff's great fun as well. Like you're saying, there's a lot of great unlicensed kind of car bodies in here, and it can be fun as well because obviously the car body is separate from the engine as well. So if you just wanted a bin truck that's like fucking capable of like 400 kilometer per hour speeds, like you can do that as well. Yeah, for me this is like, when I think of Penny Racers Choro Q, this is the prime experience for me. I really like Road Trip as well, but there's a lot of the kind of peripheral stuff around the game that I find kind of too slow, too monotonous, and I think from a nostalgia point of view, those ones have a lot more character. I can get that 100%. This, like you've probably seen from the gameplay footage, it's not exactly a stylish looking game, this one, especially in comparison to Even 3, where that had a very distinct style. But there's something kind of likeable for this one for me, where it feels like they wanted to replicate that type of CarPG experience in a kind of Choro Q type way, and it makes it really fun.
It's also like, it's not the prettiest looking game I've ever seen, obviously, but I think for what they want to do, it actually works better than like, you know, the PlayStation Q3 or the other ones. Because look, if you're gonna do a game that's like a little bit more graphically, like isn't trying to go for a super photorealistic thing, is a little bit more simplistic, you know, doesn't have like all the polygons or, you know, the best textures or whatever. Like the other side to that is you should be able to do a lot of crazy things with like detail and effects, and you should be throwing like a lot of, for lack of a better term, a lot of stuff at you, a lot of visual noise and whatever. And I feel like Gadget Racers / Penny Racers does that. Like, just between the way the cars look, as I said, you can put robot legs on your vehicle, you can drive a robot, like all of these things. There's a lot of cars on the track at one time. It isn't as much for detail or art style, but it does do a lot in terms of, you know, of giving you a lot, sort of fleshing out the world in a way where there are a lot of things to occupy it. And I'm looking, I'm watching this video. I have it going on in the background, and I'm watching someone customize their car, and they've basically applied, like, there's a solid rocker boosters on the side, there's wings on the top, there's other crap, and then they're just like changing the body. So every time they change the body, like all of these parts apply to whatever body they've chosen as their base. So this guy's going through a Toyota Yaris, a Pajero Rally Raid car. There's a Toyota Celica. There's a Suzuki Swift. There's like what looks like a London bus, an old Beetle, an old Mini, a 2CV. Like, and none of these things are licensed, and they're just all in the game. And I'm assuming eventually they'll get to the XCR9. I love games like this where you start playing and you go through, oh, look, there's just a fried shrimp for some reason. Okay. Um, I love when you're playing games like this and you go through the car list and you never know what the next thing is going to be. You have no idea of what's going to be in this game, the next time that you scroll. It just seems fun and just completely unpredictable.
Yeah, and that sums up this game because by comparison to other games, it is slightly more kind of reserved in terms of there's no talking cars or president cars or anything like that. But that doesn't mean like things like the shrimp car body and the famous turkey dinner car body as well that you unlock for beating one of the harder license tests. Like all this type of shit's here. Yeah, the car list especially is just great fun because some of the choices in there do seem inspired by that idea that people love driving cars in games that they would never think they wanted to drive. And I think that's especially at this period of time, early PlayStation 2, kind of late PlayStation 1. Everybody was curious just to see what car lists existed in games, and the selections here are kind of pretty inspired as well, I would say. Oddly enough, the series, if you want to consider it all one singular series, would get licensed cars in the Wii version. I've never played that, and apparently it's pretty bad in its entirety. But that game actually had licensed cars, so that would be the first time licensed cars actually appear. And it's interesting that's the case because I think like the Choro Q toy brand had real world cars available in toy form for quite the entire life cycle of the gaming series. So it's interesting that they never actually used that, but maybe it is because of I suppose the headaches of saying to a company, we're going to put a jet booster in the back of your car and skis and stuff. I don't know from a licensing point of view if that'd be a headache or not.
Yeah, I mean, historically, car makers don't love to be, fun or, agree with what developers are doing, even if it serves sort of the flavor of the game. I mean, this is a type of situation where they absolutely have every incentive to just kind of go along with it. It's a toy car line. Everything's going to be very, very pleasant, very, agreeable probably for your brand. No one's going to try and make your car crumple and catch on fire and stuff. But what car manufacturers and companies are. They don't like anyone to have fun because they're worried they'll lose money. So it is what it is. I mean, I don't think these games needed it at all, especially because like, clearly Takara was able to get away with putting these cars. It's not like some other games. Like, it's not like, say, like, I don't know. It's not like Burnout, where they have unlicensed cars and you can tell that they're clearly inspired by a real car, but they change enough things. Or I guess the perfect modern example of that would be GTA. It's not like that. Like, these cars are fully, like, Choro Q toy versions of existing cars. There is no mistaking like the Bug-Eye Impreza for the Bug-Eye Impreza. That's what it is. And when you consider like some of the weird cars that they tried to put in this game, as we were just talking about with PS2 penny racers, yeah, there's no other car that looks like an Alpine A110, so it's pretty obvious there. It's just funny, I guess, that they were able to kind of go along with the series all the way up until the end without really acknowledging that. But on a different note, I'm looking at footage of what was called Road Trip the Arcade Edition in the US. Now, that one was just Choro Q, and it was Gadget Racers on the GameCube in Europe. So what was Gadget Racers on the PS2 in North America is a different game from Gadget Racers on the GameCube in Europe, and it came out later. And this was the first one I tried because I thought the visual style was like my favorite, and it's a little bit more. The cars kind of have this cell shade quality to them, so it looks. I don't want to say Automodelista because that would be too kind. It looks like GT Pro Series or GT Cube, like a little bit shittier, but that's kind of what they're trying to go for. And this game I actually, because I played this like months ago. I remember we were doing we did the Christmas podcast, and right after I was like really curious to try one.
Yeah.
And I got right into it, and I was like, I don't enjoy this at all. This is not fun. It looks okay, but it's just not fun.
Yeah.
And I think, kind of revisiting all of this and beginning to see your point that it's like, these games aren't really fun to play when you're on the track. So to really extract the most enjoyment out of them, you have to play the ones that just let you do all the crazy shit with the customization.
Yeah.
Just really leave nothing off the table. And yeah, that's totally understandable now. I mean, this one has some interesting tracks, and like it almost looks like a Toy Commander type vibe. Like they're in like, it seems like maybe it's one of the only Choro Q games where they actually set cars in places that you would expect a toy car to be. So they're on like a living room floor. But then that's never really been my kind of thing either. So yeah, I mean, I guess the popular way to read all of this is that whatever your preference might be for a game like this, the series tried so many different things on the back of so many different developers with so many different visions that there should be one in here that you maybe like more than the others, even if it isn't like going to be one of your favorite racing games of all time. There's like each one is kind of going for a different thing, and you're bound to find one that you favor a little bit more than the other ones, and I guess that's kind of neat.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. They tried loads of different stuff, and I think that's why one of these appeals. And you can go to any YouTube video, and the top comment is always, "This is so underrated." Like every time, there's always somebody saying that for one of these games, and that kind of highlights the point you're making. And to be honest, I don't really know if I agree with that sentiment either. I think these games are perfectly fine for what they are, and for me personally, I'm of the mindset with this series that if it wasn't for, and a lot of the games, these kind of real world-ish looking cars, I don't know how much I would have actually enjoyed it. Because for me, like you were saying, Adam, like the appeal is having these toyified versions of real vehicles and being able to modify them and just have a bit of fun with them. So if the cars looked so entirely fictionalized, I don't think I would have been as interested. But I think like the appeal for me was always this idea of having real world cars shrunk to these Choro Q sizes and having fun just modifying them and putting ridiculous engine parts and stuff in and having that level of uh, customization, I suppose, like in a time period where it wasn't really that common to have such levels of customization across both the internals of the car and the outside of the car. Because in the case of the PS2 Choro QHG, you can even choose like the drivetrain and stuff for these cars, which is pretty cool. Like I quite like the idea that you can have that level of modification. And that's where the appeal was for me. But the actual on-track driving experience was just a means of experiencing that. I don't think I would ever say the racing was fantastic or anything like that, and I think most people would agree that it is the whatever version of Choro Q, Penny Racers, Gadget Racers you like, it's probably everything around that on-track experience that makes it memorable, and that's absolutely fine. You can acknowledge that and also understand that from a racing point of view, it's not really offering anything entirely unique.
Yeah, two things I want to point out. One is I hadn't really looked into the Saturn version. So there was a game called Choro Q Park on the Saturn. And I think I dismissed it because it seemed like having the subtitle of Park, it seemed like it was maybe a different sort of game, not really part of the main series. This one actually looks really good. This one I'm curious to play. I think it visually looks better than the PlayStation games, which is pretty much unheard of for a game on the Saturn. The art style is really pretty, and it looks like it reminds me a little bit more of Rally Day Europe. It also reminds me a little bit more of like if you ever played on the N64 or are aware of it, Snowboard Kids. Like that's kind of the art style, and
yeah, I can see that.
It really fits Choro Q. There's like it's also more of like it looks like it's more of like a kart style game in terms of like combat and pickups and shooting other people with weapons and stuff. It's a game on the Saturn, and they rightfully put a Lancia Delta Integrale in it. Yes. It looks really charming, and I wanna try it out. That was kind of the first thing I wanted to note. The second thing I wanted to note was, and I saw this last night when I was doing a little bit of research. Have you ever seen the introduction to Choro Q HG4?
I haven't actually. No.
So,
Should I look this up?
yeah, I want you to look it up because we're almost going. I mean, it's not enthusia level lunacy, but it's not far off. There are these words that pop up on the screen. Some of them look like they aren't real.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
We get a close up of the cars in the audience on the grandstand, chilling with their drink of motor oil, because that's the refreshment that the car enjoys when it's watching other cars race. It's one of those things that really makes you sort of question like this world and like how it exists, and the fact that there are no humans in it, and the dynamics of the society and everything. In a very short amount of time, it's very strange. I recommend everybody watches it.
I think I seen a car on top of a skyscraper like Batman as well.
Yes, yeah, that's in there. Yeah, it's like a word will show up on screen, it'll say freedom, and then it'll show that word in different languages, but each time it does it, it capitalizes different letters within the word at random. So it just looks kind of AI generated. Everything about this looks like AI generated. I don't know how to put it any differently.
All under a minute as well. Like under a minute. Like that's insane.
Throws everything at you in a minute. Yeah, and the cuts are so quick. It's crazy. It's almost it reminds me a little bit of like the intro to like Sega. I think it was Sega GT 2002, but it's even more out there. Just the visual style of like words, close-ups on cars. We're superimposing a bunch of things over each other. I like the part where there's a skyline and the Z on the grid, and then one turns to talk to the other one and flashes its lights, and then the skyline turns back to Z and flashes its lights too, and then the word friends pops up on the screen.
Yeah. It's certainly something. That's made my Saturday.
We'll post it up on the Twitter too, so people can see it. But
got to do it.
Yeah, I want to try a Saturn one though, and I do want to try. The one you mentioned as well, which I've already forgotten the name of because
it's just HG.
So many names. Just HG, okay.
Yeah, it's the Saturn one does look really cool actually, and I'm not sure what's happening in the gameplay clip I seen, but it was like a car crossed like a certain line on the track, and it changed the car to like a race mod version of the same car or something, or it was a different vehicle it transformed into. So I wonder what's going on there.
I saw like a Sylvia pass that line and become like some sort of like Dakar, SUV or something. So that was
maybe you
cool.
choose multiple vehicles or something.
Yeah, I mean it's a novel idea. I think part of the issue too is like, we're talking about all these games and Penny Racers, where it holds up the when you were talking about holds up because it just goes through those absurd lanes, right? Whereas like I was looking at, God, I don't know which one it was, but the one I was just talking about on the GameCube a second ago, Road Trip the Arcade Edition.
Yeah,
it's like it doesn't do anything crazy, and it doesn't like there's no sort of mechanic that makes a game stand out. It literally seems like it's, take Gran Turismo, but make it a lot worse and a lot uglier and a lot less fun to play with toy cars, and we'll do the same thing. Like you just drive, but the driving isn't fun. I feel like for these games to stand out, they really need some sort of element that you're not gonna get anywhere else. And that Saturn one with the sort of thing where it seems like maybe you pick a couple cars at the start of a race, and then you go past the line and it changes, and making assumptions here because I haven't played it. Maybe like, you go from asphalt to dirt, and then like that's where the changeover point starts. So that's where you can like change into like an SUV or a rally car or something. Like that's really cool. That's a great idea. That's something that maybe, I don't know how it's implemented, obviously, but if it was implemented well, that's something that like should maybe have stuck throughout the series. And I don't know, but I think part of the issue too is, the developer of that one was a company called Next Tech, which I've never heard of before. I don't think they made any other Choro Q games. So when you have a series that's changing hands so many times, it's really hard to sort of keep that constant theme and sort of build upon the progress that the last one made.
Yeah, it's almost not for the same circumstances, but it's similar to the runabout chat in the sense that there was something here that they probably could have pursued and improved upon after each iteration, but there was more of a kind of haphazard approach taken to just giving people or developers the chance to make a game that they wanted to make, and then that means the series itself is a little bit kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I do like talking about games like this and Runabout though, because they're complete blind spots for me, and they're very interesting. Even if they're not always very good, they're definitely interesting to talk about on the podcast. And I imagine there are a few people in the Time Extend Discord who are familiar with Choro Q, but I would imagine a lot more that aren't. So hopefully this inspires you to find the one you like. God help you looking at that Wikipedia page and trying to sort through all of the names, but find the one you like and check it out.
Would you believe that I've just found some information about Nextech?
Okay.
And they're actually known as Nex Entertainment, which means they also worked on Toge R for the Xbox, which we talked about in the pod before with Andrew Elmore.
Andrew Elmore's favorite racing game.
Yeah, exactly. They also worked on Resident Evil Code Veronica. Yeah, they've actually Dino Crisis as well, Time Crisis 3, 4, Bayonetta for the PS3. They worked on that with Sega and Platinum. So
wow, they seem like they seem okay. They develop games for other companies on a contract basis. They closed in 2016. They seem almost like a Tosei or something. Like you don't see their name a lot, but they contribute to a lot of things. A lot of notable games. They help Sega with Shenmue. A bunch of Time Crisis games, as you said. Bayonetta on the PS3. The Resident Evil on the Saturn, and Ballerina Toshinden on the Saturn. So, yeah, lots of different titles here. Very interesting. Must have been doing something right to get all that work.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think that just about wraps this up. We wanted to keep this one short because we both have our commitments and we're all so busy these days. But glad we got a chance to talk about Choro Q for sure, because it was, as I said, it was a blind spot, and it's exactly the type of game that I love that we I don't even know if I would say give love to on Time Extend, because everything we said here wasn't completely glowing, but nevertheless, go out there, try to find in our podcast that's talking about Choro Q, and we'll wait, because I don't think you'll find many others.
Exactly.
That's why we're here. So as always, I like to put the note at the end of the episode. Go check out the Time Extend Discord when you can, and you can do that by just sending us a DM rather on Twitter. Time_extend is our handle if you don't know it already, and just let us know that you'd like to join, and we will get you in there. But I think that's really all I had to say. Brendan, anything on your docket?
No, mate, that's all good. Just thanks everybody for listening, and have a great day.
Take it easy, everybody. Thank you.